There is a particular kind of silence that settles over the desert just before a man decides to do something he cannot undo. Cole Draven had heard that silence many times. He had heard it in Kansas, before he put a bullet through a cattle baron who'd burned 3 homesteads and slept fine afterward. He had heard it in New Mexico, crouched on a canyon ridge above a man who'd made the mistake of stealing from the wrong people. He had heard it in Arizona, in Colorado, in the nameless stretches of land between towns that didn't even appear on maps, places where the wind moved through dry grass and the only sound was the particular nothing that comes before something permanent. Cole Draven was, by trade and by reputation, a man who finished what he started. He had been hired 12 times in 6 years, 12 contracts, 12 names on a list that only existed in his memory, 12 men who were alive on Monday and were not alive by Friday. He had never once questioned a name on that list, never once asked why. The men who paid him didn't explain themselves, and Cole had long ago decided that asking questions was the fastest way to become a 13th name on somebody else's list. You didn't last in his line of work by being curious. You lasted by being precise, by being patient, by being the kind of man who could sit in a room with a terrible thing and feel absolutely nothing about it. Cole Draven was very good at feeling nothing. He had practiced it since he was 19 years old, and he had gotten so good at it that some days he wasn't sure there was anything left underneath the practice. So when a man named Gerald Aldrich slid an envelope across a hotel bar in Tucson and said the name Elias Cade, Cole picked up the envelope, ordered one last whiskey, and rode north toward a place called Dry Creek without asking a single thing about why Elias Cade needed to die. He would spend the rest of his life wishing he had. If you're new here, welcome to Western Tale by P.D. My name is P.D., and I tell stories about the frontier that don't let you go. Before we begin, hit that subscribe button and ring that bell. Because this story, you are going to want to be here from the first word to the last. I promise you that. Now, let's ride. The envelope contained 3 things: a name, Elias Cade; a location, Dry Creek, Cochise County, Arizona Territory; and a sum of money that made Cole sit very still for a long moment before folding the envelope and tucking it into the inside pocket of his coat, close to his chest, the way you carry something that has weight to it. He had been paid well before, but not like this. Whatever Elias Cade had done, or whatever he possessed that another man wanted badly enough, the man who wanted him dead was willing to spend considerably to make it permanent. Cole left Tucson on a gray Thursday morning with nothing but his horse, his rifle, his saddlebags, and the particular emptiness that had lived in his chest since the age of 19, when the war had taken everything that had once made him a person instead of just a function. He did not say goodbye to anyone. There was no one to say goodbye to. He simply rose before the town woke, saddled his horse in the dark livery, and rode north as the sky went from black to the deep bruised purple of early morning on the desert. He was 31 years old, lean and weathered in the way desert men go, lean and weathered, not from hunger, but from sun and wind, and the specific weight of doing what he did for a living. His face was the kind of face that did not give information freely, angular, controlled, with the particular stillness of a man who has learned that most of what people express with their faces is a liability. His eyes were a pale, washed-out gray that people often found unsettling, not because they were cold, but because they were patient. Cole Draven's eyes looked at the world the way a man looks at a chessboard, always several moves ahead, never surprised, never rushed. He had ridden into harder places than Cochise County. He expected to be done by the end of the week. He rode north for 2 days. The Arizona Territory in late autumn was beautiful, in the way only brutal places can be. All red rock and bruised sky, and the kind of hush that makes a man feel very small and very alone. Cole didn't mind small. Cole didn't mind alone. He had been traveling with both for so long that they felt less like conditions and more like companions. He ate cold meals and slept light, and watched the stars move overhead with the same patient attention he gave everything. And if some quiet part of him recognized that a man who watches stars the way other men watch enemies has lost something important, he did not examine it closely. On the second evening, he came over a ridge and saw Dry Creek for the first time. It was a modest town, a single main street with the usual anatomy, general. Store, saloon, livery, a church with a weather-vane rooster that had rusted permanently northeast, a few side streets with houses sitting behind scrubby front gardens, laundry on lines, smoke threading from chimneys in the cooling evening air. The kind of town that survives not because it is remarkable, but because the people in it have decided, collectively, that this is where they are, and have organized their lives around that decision with the practical stubbornness of frontier people. Beyond the town, the land opened up into broad rangeland. Even in the failing light, Cole could see cattle grazing, maybe 200 head, spread across grass that was surprisingly green for the season, and the thin silver line of a creek running through the middle of the pasture, catching the last of the light. And beyond the cattle, a ranch house. Even from this distance, it was clearly the most substantial building for miles. Not a mansion, not a showpiece, nothing that announced itself, or asked to be admired, but the structure of a man who had built something real with his own hands over a long period of time and had no interest in impressing anyone. A working house, a serious house, the kind of house that says, I am here, I have been here, I intend to remain. Elias Cade's house. Cole made camp on the ridge that night and didn't light a fire. He ate cold beef and hard bread and studied the ranch below in the darkness until the lamps in the house went out one by one, each window going dark in its turn. And the last thing he saw before he laid his bedroll flat and closed his eyes was a single upstairs window, the warm amber of a lamp burning late. He thought nothing of it. It was just a window. It would not remain just a window for long. Before we go further, drop a comment right now and tell me, do you think a man like Cole can still be saved? Do you think a man who has spent 11 years doing what he does still has something left that's worth saving? Let me know below. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? There are 8 more chapters in this story, and trust me when I tell you, you do not want to miss what happens next. Cole spent 3 days studying the town before he made a single move. This was his method, and it had kept him alive and free for 6 years in a profession where both of those outcomes were far from guaranteed. Patient as stone, quiet as shadow. He had learned long ago that the men who got caught, the ones who made fatal mistakes, who ended up on the wrong end of a sheriff's rope or a grieving family's rifle, were the men who moved too fast, who underestimated the geography of a place, who forgot that every town is a living thing with its own rhythms, its own loyalties, its own memory, its own eyes. A town knows things. A town notices strangers. A town has people whose particular function, bartender, livery hand, store clerk, boarding house proprietress, means they see everything and remember most of it. You had to move through a town carefully, the way you move through deep water, so that the town closed around your passage and left no trace of where you'd been. So Cole watched. He took a room at the Dry Creek boarding house under the name James Holt, a drifter looking for day work during the cattle season. The lie was easy because it was mostly true. He was drifting and he was working, just not the kind of work you could list in a ledger or describe to a decent person over dinner. Mrs. Adeline Pruitt, who ran the boarding house with the iron efficiency of a woman who had outlasted 2 husbands and wasn't in the market for sentiment, charged him $2 a week for a clean room and 2 meals a day, and asked no questions beyond what she needed for her own records. Cole appreciated this about her. He also noted with professional attention that she remembered everything she heard and saw in that house, a detail that meant he would be careful about what he said and did within her walls. Within 3 days, he knew the following. Elias Cade was 43 years old. He had homesteaded in Dry Creek 16 years ago, arriving with nothing but a mule, a seed bag, $40, and the kind of stubbornness that either kills a man or turns him into a legend. It had turned Elias Cade into a legend, or at least the closest thing Dry Creek had to one. He was respected. Not the loud, backslapping respect of a man who buys drinks and makes promises and fills a room with his personality. The quiet, load-bearing kind of respect that communities give to men who have been consistently reliable across the span of decades. When Elias Cade spoke at the town meetings, people listened, not because he demanded it, but because he had earned it, dollar by difficult dollar, season by hard season, over 16 years of doing what he said he would do. When Elias Cade vouched for a man's character, that vouching meant something real in the world. He had a wife, a daughter, 7 hired hands who had all worked the ranch for at least 3 years, which told you something important about the man who employed them. He was also, Cole had learned through careful and casual inquiry, in a legal dispute with a man named Gerald Aldrich. Gerald Aldrich, the same man who had slid an envelope across a hotel bar in Tucson. Cole had known, of course, that Aldrich was the contractor. What he had not known, because he had not asked, was that the dispute between Aldrich and Cade was not some distant, abstract business grievance played out between lawyers in a city courthouse. It was local. It was active. It was about water rights to the creek that ran through both their properties, and according to every person Cole had carefully, casually questioned over 3 days, the dispute was about to go decisively in Cade's favor. The territorial court had ruled once already in Cade's direction. Aldrich had appealed. Appeal was failing. The final ruling was expected within the month. And so now a man from Tucson was staying at the boarding house, asking about day work, eating quietly in corners, watching everything, and riding out mornings to look at the land. Cole did not like what was assembling itself in the back of his mind. He had never been naive about the men who hired him. He knew they were not good men. Good men did not arrange for other men to be quietly removed from the world. But there was a functional morality he had constructed over the years, a wall he had built, brick by careful brick, between himself and the full consequences of his work. The men he was paid to remove, he told himself, were men the world did not particularly mourn. Men who had done damage, men who had created enemies willing to spend real money on permanent solutions, men who had, in some way he did not examine too closely, earned the particular ending they received. He was not sure Elias Cade was that kind of man. He was not sure of it at all. And he was still sitting with that uncertainty, quiet and unresolved in the back of his chest, the way a stone sits at the bottom of still water, when he walked into the general store on the 4th morning and met Margaret Cade for the first time. Stay with me, because this right here is where everything changes. Chapter 3 is coming, and you're going to feel it. Subscribe if you haven't already. Leave a like if this story is already getting to you. And don't go anywhere. Cole would later try to describe that first moment and find that he lacked the words for it in any way that did it justice without sounding like a man who had lost his reason. Margaret Cade was striking in the particular way of women who have no idea they are striking, which is always the most quietly devastating kind. Dark hair pinned loosely at the back of her neck, a few strands coming loose at her temple in the late morning heat. A practical dress, the dress of a woman who works, not one who observes other people working, with flour dusting the cuff of the left sleeve, eyes that were a warm, serious brown, the color of good earth after rain, set in a face that was not soft exactly, but expressive in the way of people who feel things fully and have learned to carry those feelings with composure rather than simply suppressing them. But what arrested him was not her appearance, it was her competence. She was moving through that general store the way a conductor moves through an orchestra, purposeful, unhurried, entirely and unconsciously in command of her environment. She was settling a monthly account at the counter while simultaneously checking items against a written list. And when the store clerk's tally came up short by 30 cents, she corrected it with a calm certainty that made him color slightly and reach for his ledger without argument. She spoke to the woman behind her in line, not turning around, maintaining her position in the transaction without losing track of it, managing 3 things at once with the quiet fluency of someone for whom this is simply Tuesday. Cole had been in every kind of difficult situation a man could find himself in. He had faced down armed men, sat across from people who wanted him dead, navigated ambushes and betrayals and the particular pressure of dangerous rooms. He had a talent for stillness under threat that other men found almost unnatural. Standing in the doorway of that general store, watching Margaret Cade correct a ledger entry, he felt something in his chest that was entirely foreign to him. He bought a tin of tobacco he didn't need and left without looking back. That evening, watching the ranch from the ridge, he saw the upstairs window lit again. This time, he knew whose window it was. He sat with that knowledge for a long time without moving, watching the distant amber square of light in the darkening landscape. She was not part of the contract. She was not his concern. She was the wife of a man he had been paid to kill, and that was the beginning and end of what she was to him. He told himself this with great firmness. He did not entirely believe himself, and the part of him that didn't believe himself was quiet about it in the specific way of things that intend to become a problem later. Over the following week, Cole found himself, through a series of small, seemingly logical decisions that he would later recognize as nothing of the sort, installed as a day laborer at the Cade Ranch. The arrangement had been made through Elias Cade himself, who had come into town for feed supplies on a Wednesday and heard from the livery owner that a man named Holt was looking for honest work. Elias had found Cole at the boarding house that evening, looked him over with the direct, unhurried appraisal of a man who trusted his own instincts about people, and offered him work at a fair day rate starting the following morning. The handshake that sealed it was dry and direct and looked Cole in the eye. Cole felt something shift uncomfortably in his chest when that handshake happened, something he did not name because naming it would have required acknowledging it. He worked. He repaired fencing in the north pasture, spending 3 days moving methodically along the line with a post driver and new wire, working hard in the autumn sun because he had always been constitutionally incapable of doing anything halfway. He moved cattle, fixed a broken wheel on the hay wagon, restrung a gate that had been sagging for a season, rehung a barn door whose hinge had rusted at an angle that made it screech every time it opened. He worked with the focused efficiency of a man who needed the physical occupation, who needed his hands busy and his body tired so that certain thoughts had less room to move. He watched Elias Cade and took notes in the ledger of his mind. Elias was a man of straight lines. He said what he meant and did not dress it up. He treated his hired hands the same way he treated his horses, not harshly, not indulgently, but with a matter-of-fact respect that acknowledged them as living creatures with dignity and sense. He rose before dawn without ceremony and worked past dark without complaint, and in the evenings he sat on the porch with his wife, the two of them in the easy proximity of people who have built something real together and no longer need to perform for each other. Cole could hear them sometimes from across the yard, not the words, just the murmur of two voices, low and unhurried. There was something in that sound that he found he could not listen to for long without having to find something else to do. And Margaret. She ran that ranch house the way Elias ran the land, with absolute quiet authority that announced itself through results rather than instruction. She fed 11 men at the long table in the back room and remembered each man's preferences without ever seeming to track them. Holt doesn't take salt. Denny won't eat onions. The two brothers from the north pasture want coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in. She managed the household accounts in a ledger she kept on the kitchen shelf, negotiated with suppliers who came to the door with the practiced ease of someone who knows exactly what things cost and what they're worth, and raised a daughter named Clara who was 7 years old and spoke with the solemn certainty of a very small judge presiding over matters of great importance. Cole watched Margaret Cade the way he watched everything, carefully, cataloging, from behind the professional distance he had maintained between himself and the world for 11 years. But she had a way of making that distance feel arbitrary. She laughed rarely. Not because she was humorless, you could see the humor in her, something quick and dry living just behind those serious eyes, but because she was a woman of economy, and laughter, for her, was something given only when it was genuinely earned. When she did laugh, fully, unexpectedly at something Clara said at the dinner table or something Elias did in the yard, it was the most unguarded sound Cole had ever heard from a grown person. It landed in the chest the way good music lands, without asking permission. He told himself every day that he was gathering intelligence, learning the layout of the property, identifying the best approach and the cleanest exit. Every day the moment felt further away. He told himself that was professional caution. He was thorough. He was careful. He was not ready. He was lying to himself, and some quiet part of him knew it. I need you to leave a comment right now and tell me, do you think Cole already knows at this point what he's going to do? Or is he still pretending? Because there's a difference between a man who's decided and a man who hasn't admitted it yet. Chapter 4 is where it all breaks open. Don't leave. Subscribe, hit the bell, and stay right here. On the 14th day, Cole made a mistake. Not the first mistake. The first was taking the contract without asking questions. Not the second. The second was riding to Dry Creek. The third was taking work at the ranch. The fourth was letting himself learn the names of things he should have kept nameless. The fifth, sixth, and seventh mistakes were more subtle, a pattern of small choices that, taken individually, looked like nothing in particular, and taken together, described a man walking deliberately in the wrong direction. The 14th day's mistake was smaller than any of those and more permanent than all of them combined. He was fixing the hinge on the barn door, alone in the late afternoon, when the light came in sideways through the open slats and turned the dust in the air to gold, and Margaret Cade appeared in the doorway with a glass of cold water, the way she appeared for all the hands when the afternoon heat ran high. She stood for a moment in the doorway, watching him work with the particular attention of a woman who notices how people do things. "You're good at this," she said. Cole looked up. "Fixing hinges isn't complicated." "No, but most men do it like they're fighting with it. You do it like you're thinking about something else." He took the water, drank, handed the glass back without quite looking at her. "Everybody does things like they're thinking about something else," he said. "I suppose." She didn't move from the doorway. "What are you thinking about?" The professional answer was nothing. The correct answer, from the standpoint of every careful habit he had built over 11 years, was nothing, and a subject change, and getting back to the hinge. And here was the mistake. He told her the truth. Not the truth. Not "I was sent here to kill your husband and I have been failing to do it for 2 weeks. That particular truth remained where it lived, deep and locked, and carrying the specific weight of something that has not yet been decided. But a truth. A real one. "A decision I made," he said, "and whether there's a way to unmake it." Margaret Cade looked at him for a moment with those rain-earth eyes, and he had the disorienting experience, one he was entirely unequipped for, of feeling genuinely seen. "My mother used to say that most men don't actually want to unmake their decisions," she said. "They just want someone to tell them the decision was the only one available, so they can stop carrying it." Cole said nothing. "Was it?" she asked. "The only one available?" He looked at his hands on the hinge. "I thought it was," he said, "when I made it." She was quiet for a moment, the way she was quiet when she was actually thinking rather than simply waiting to speak. "The decisions that cost the most," she said, "are always the ones we made when we thought we had no choice, because no choice feels like freedom from responsibility. And then later," she stopped, looked at the yard. "Later you find out it wasn't no choice at all. It was just the choice you could make without feeling like you made it." She left. Cole sat in that barn for a very long time with the hinge in his hands and something unraveling slowly in his chest, something he had no vocabulary for, because he had spent 11 years packing every feeling he owned into a space too small to breathe, and he had never once expected any of it to find a way out through a conversation in a barn doorway about hinges and the nature of choices. That night, he lit the candle on his nightstand and took out paper and wrote a letter addressed to Gerald Aldrich. He did not mail it. He read it twice, and it told him things about himself that he found he did not want confirmed in writing, and he burned it in the candle flame and watched the ash curl and fall. He wrote a second letter. That one he burned without reading. Faster. The writing of it had been enough. The third letter he started and could not finish, because somewhere in the middle of the second paragraph he put the pen down and sat in the dark with the candle burning low and faced, really faced, without the usual professional distance, without the carefully constructed wall of functional morality, the full shape of what he was carrying. He had been hired to kill a good man, A man who got up before dawn and worked past dark and had built something real and lasting in a harsh place with his own hands. A man whose wife said things that cracked open sealed rooms in the chest of a person who had given up expecting to be cracked open. A man whose daughter called her father Daddy in the tone of complete trust that only very young children and very safe people use. The tone that means, I know with absolute certainty that this person will not let anything happen to me. A man who had shaken Cole's hand and seen, or thought he saw, another decent man looking back. Cole Drevin had killed 11 men. He had slept fine after each one. He was not sleeping now. He sat with the dying candle and the unfinished letter and did the arithmetic one more time. The devil's arithmetic of a man trying to calculate his way out of a situation that had stopped being calculable the moment he let himself know these people's names. No sum he arrived at came out clean. None of them ever would. That silence I mentioned at the beginning, that desert silence before a man does something he can't undo. Cole is sitting inside it right now, and he has 2 roads in front of him, and he is running out of time to choose. Chapter 5 is where something breaks. Leave a like, drop a comment, and stay with me. We're halfway through, and this story is just getting started. Gerald Aldrich arrived in Dry Creek on a Wednesday. Cole saw him from across the main street and felt his stomach drop with a cold, specific precision, the way a stone drops into deep water, that sense of weight following gravity without appeal. Aldrich was a big man, not tall but wide, built with the solidity of someone who had never been truly hungry and could not fully conceive of the state. He wore good clothes badly, the way money sometimes sits on men who acquired it through means that don't permit ease, always slightly too tight across the shoulders, always slightly wrong in the way an ill-fitting coat is wrong, as if the body underneath has never quite learned to inhabit its own prosperity. His eyes were an accountant's eyes, always calculating, always measuring what things cost and what they were worth, never quite present in whatever room he was standing in, because there was always another room he was calculating about instead. He had come to check on his investment. He found Cole at the saloon that evening, sat down uninvited, and ordered 2 whiskeys with the casual authority of a man who assumes he owns whatever table he's at. "You've had 3 weeks," he said, without bothering to lower his voice to a level Cole found appropriate for the conversation they were having. "I know how long I've had. The court reconvenes in 10 days. If Cade is still breathing when that judge sits down, the water rights finalize in his name. Everything I've built on that southern parcel, everything, Mr. Holt, becomes essentially worthless." Cole looked at the whiskey, did not touch it. "I want it done before Sunday," Aldrich said. "You want," Cole said, "a great many things." Something shifted in Aldrich's face, the practiced patience of a man accustomed to getting what he pays for showing, along its edge, a hairline crack of something uglier underneath, something that had been there all along and was simply better hidden when the account was running smoothly. "I paid you a significant sum," he said, "whatever name you're using. You paid me to do a job," Cole said. "I'll do the job when I decide the job is ready to be done." "And when might that be?" Something slid into Aldrich's eyes then, not heat, but a kind of cold specificity that Cole recognized as the expression of a man who has been watching more carefully than he has appeared to be watching. "After you've finished fixing his fences, after you've eaten a few more meals at his table." A pause, deliberate, waited. "After you've made eyes at his wife?" The silence that followed was the kind that makes a room feel smaller and warmer and harder to breathe in. Cole looked at Gerald Aldrich for a long moment with his pale, patient eyes. "Don't," he said. Just the word. Quiet as a door closing softly in a house where everyone has gone to sleep. Aldrich held the gaze for 3 seconds, then looked away. He left money on the table for the whiskeys he had ordered and walked out without another word, his broad shoulders carrying the particular posture of a man who has said what he came to say and is content to let it sit. Cole sat alone in the saloon for a long time. He had told himself many things over the past 3 weeks, that he was being methodical, professional, appropriately thorough, that what he felt when he was near Margaret Cade was observation and nothing else, intelligence gathering, the necessary project of understanding the terrain. That the restlessness in his chest at night was tactical restlessness, the natural unease of a job that had not yet been completed. Gerald Aldrich, with his accountant's eyes and his Sunday deadline, and his careful, pointed observation about a hired hand who had apparently lost his professional clarity, had just burned every one of those comfortable lies to the ground. Cole drank the whiskey. Then he walked out into the cool desert night and stood in the empty street with the stars very bright above him and the distant lights of the Cade ranch visible on the dark plain to the north, and knew, with the same deep bodily certainty with which he had always known when things were about to go irreversible, that something had broken open in him that was not going to close again. He was not going to kill Elias Cade. That was done. That was decided. And that meant what he had now was not a job. It was a problem. Several problems, in fact, arranged in a row like dominoes, each one dependent on the others. He had a contractor who had paid him in good faith and would not accept the news of a refusal gracefully. He had a man and a woman who did not know they were in danger, and who could not adequately protect themselves from that danger without understanding its source. And understanding its source meant understanding how Cole had come to be in their barn and at their table. He had himself, a man with 11 names in his memory and no particular talent for anything in the world except the one talent he had just decided he was done using. He looked at the ranch lights for a long time. Then he walked back to the boarding house and sat at the small desk and started writing a different kind of letter. Not to Aldrich, to himself. Cole has made his choice, but choosing is the easy part. Living inside the choice, that's something else entirely. And Gerald Aldrich did not get rich by being the kind of man who accepts a refund. Chapter 6. Subscribe. Leave a comment. And do not move. He should have left. Every practical, tactical calculation in Cole Draven's trained and disciplined mind produced the same clear output. Leave. Ride south, put distance and geography between himself and Dry Creek, find a way to return Aldrich's money, or simply accept the consequences of not returning it, and disappear, the way he had disappeared before from harder situations than this one. He had the skills. He had the horse. He had the practiced discipline of a man who had been leaving places without warning for most of his adult life. He told himself he would leave in the morning. He was still there at noon. He told himself he would leave after supper. He was still there at sunset, in the Cade yard, because Clara had come running across the yard to find him with the casual, unself-conscious confidence of a child who has decided that a particular adult is trustworthy and sees absolutely no reason to be subtle about it. She had found 4 kittens born behind the feed sacks in the barn, and she needed someone to tell, and Cole was the nearest available someone. He crouched in the hay while Clara introduced each kitten with the gravity of a formal presentation. The largest was named Duchess. The gray one was Fog. The one with the white paw was Mitten for obvious reasons. And the smallest, the one who had apparently arrived in the world with an attitude entirely disproportionate to his size, was named Captain. Because he acts like he's in charge, Clara explained with the tone of someone reporting a factual observation rather than making a characterization. Even though he's the smallest, he walks in first. He eats first. She looked up at Cole with her mother's serious brown eyes and her father's square-jawed face. That's what captains do. That's what captains do, Cole agreed. He stayed in that barn for longer than he needed to, watching a 7-year-old girl with her kittens in the golden late afternoon light, and understood with a clarity that bypassed his usual defenses entirely what it would mean to leave. Not simply what he would be leaving behind, though there was that, accumulating in him like water in a low place, more than he had allowed himself to name. But what it would mean about him, what it would confirm about the life he had built, that he had passed through this place, through these people, through a kitchen table and a porch and a barn and a woman's words and a child's kittens, and left them exactly as vulnerable as he had found them, because he had decided, at the last moment, not to be the instrument of their destruction, but had not, ultimately, been willing to be the instrument of their protection either. He had spent 11 years being a tool that other men picked up and put down. He had always told himself that this was a kind of freedom, no weight, no ties, no grief. He understood now, in the hay with Captain asserting small dominance over his siblings, that what he had called freedom was the absence of anything worth protecting. And the absence of anything worth protecting, while it did spare you certain kinds of pain, also meant that you moved through the world without leaving anything in it. He had not left anything anywhere in 11 years. He was tired of it. He found Elias Cade that evening on the porch. This was the conversation Cole had been circling for days, the one he had been preparing for and avoiding in equal measure for reasons that had to do with the specific discomfort of saying true things to a man you had intended to harm. Elias was mending a piece of bridle leather by lamplight. He did not look up immediately when Cole sat down on the step below him, which was itself a kind of welcome, the acknowledgement of a man who was comfortable enough with another's presence to continue what he was doing rather than shifting into the performance of receiving a visitor. They sat in silence for a while. The night was cool and clear, the stars beginning to show, the pasture dark and quiet below them. "You're a careful man," Elias said eventually. "People say that." More than careful. He turned the leather in his hands, examining the worn section. A careful man watches a place, learns its rhythms, identifies its routines, figures out where the weak points are. A pause. "I've been ranching long enough to recognize when someone is doing exactly that." Cole looked at the dark pasture. He did not speak. "I don't think you needed—" "The work," Elias said. Not accusatory, not threatening, simply matter-of-fact in the way he said most things. "No," Cole said. "Gerald Aldrich." The name settled into the night air between them and stayed there. "How long have you known?" Cole asked. "Known he'd send someone?" "A while." Elias set down the leather and turned to look at Cole directly, the frank, level, entirely undeceivable gaze of a man who has nothing to hide and is not asking you to either. "Known it was you specifically?" 2 days after you hired on. I have a brother who tends bar in Tucson. He sent word." A silence. "And you still gave me work," Cole said. "Let me eat at your table. Let me spend time near your daughter." "I decided to see what you'd do when the time came," Elias said, still without anger, without accusation, as if this were simply the most logical thing in the world. "I'm a decent judge of men. I decided to trust my judgment." "That was a considerable risk," Cole said. "Most things worth anything are," Elias replied simply. Another silence. Somewhere in the dark, cattle moved. A horse shifted in the barn. The lamplight threw long shadows across the porch boards. "I'm not going to do it," Cole said. "I know. Aldrich is going to send someone else. He was in town Wednesday." "I know that too." "Then I need to do a number of things," Elias Cade said quietly, "and I've been thinking about each of them carefully." He looked at Cole again, and what was in his eyes was not the simple relief of a man who has just been told he isn't going to die tonight. It was something more complex and more serious, the expression of a man who has taken the full and honest measure of a situation and is not yet finished reckoning with it. "But first, I want to know what changed." Cole was quiet for a long time. The lamp flickered in a small gust of wind. "Your wife," he said finally. "She said something to me. In the barn." Elias was quiet. "She said the most costly decisions are the ones we made when we thought we had no choice." Cole looked at his hands. "I'd been telling myself I had no choice, for a long time, about a lot of things." A pause. She made that harder to believe. Elias Cade looked out at the dark sky above his pasture, the stars, the distant hills, the land he had built himself into over 16 years, for a long, quiet moment. "She's right about most things," he said at last. "Yes," Cole said. "It's occasionally inconvenient," Elias said, and there was something in his voice that was almost, but not quite, humor. The warmth of a man speaking about a person he loves with the particular candor of the late evening when the performance of the day is done. Cole looked at the stars. For the first time in longer than he could accurately remember, he did not feel like a function. He felt like a man, sitting on a porch, trying to figure out what came next. It was not comfortable, but it was real. Two men on a porch with the truth finally on the table between them. But truth on a table doesn't stop what's already in motion. Gerald Aldrich is in town. He has money, and men who need money, and a deadline. Chapter 7. The storm arrives. Like this video if this story is holding you. Share it, and stay. Cole did not sleep that night. He lay on the boarding house cot with his eyes open and the darkness thick around him, and listened to the particular silence of a town after midnight, the settling of buildings, the distant movement of horses, the sound of his own breathing, and ran through everything one more time. Elias knew. That was settled. Aldrich was in town. That was a problem with a clock on it. The court reconvened in 10 days. Aldrich needed this done before then, needed it badly enough that he had come in person to apply pressure, which meant the pressure he had applied. Wednesday evening at the saloon had felt insufficient to him, which meant he would not wait long before escalating. Cole had refused the job. Aldrich did not yet know this formally, but a contractor as experienced as Aldrich did not need a formal notification. He had looked at Cole across that table, read the face, heard the word "don't," and drawn his own conclusions. The escalation was already in motion. It had probably been in motion since Wednesday night. Cole got up, dressed, sat at the small desk. He did not write a letter this time. There was no one to write to. What he had to do next was not something that could be arranged by mail. What he had to do next was simple in outline and ugly in execution, which was the nature of most of the things he had done in his life, except that the ones he was thinking about now were ugly in a direction he had never gone before. He had spent 6 years removing things from the world. He was thinking now about keeping something in it. He thought about Elias on the porch, the directness of the man, the complete absence of self-pity or panic, the dry humor about his wife being right about things, the handshake on the first day, the way he had trusted his own judgment about a man who had come to his property with the worst possible intentions and had been offered dinner and honest wages anyway. He thought about Margaret at the barn door, the flower on her cuff, the specific way she had of making a person feel that she was actually listening, not waiting for her turn to speak, not formulating a response, but genuinely receiving what was being said and considering it with the full weight of her attention. He thought about Clara explaining Captain's temperament with the seriousness of a biographer documenting an important subject. He thought about the upstairs window, lit amber in the dark. He thought about 11 names. He thought, what is a man, finally, but the sum of what he has protected and what he has destroyed? And if that arithmetic was the true accounting, the one that mattered, the one that couldn't be doctored or deferred, then what did his ledger say? He sat with that question in the dark for a long time. He was still sitting with it when the sky outside began to go from black to purple. He put on his coat, checked his rifle, went to the livery and saddled his horse in the pre-dawn dark, moving quietly, and rode out toward the Cade ranch as the first gray light began to show on the eastern ridge. He did not have a plan, exactly. He had a direction. Sometimes that was enough. Cole is riding. He doesn't have a plan. He has a choice he already made, and he's riding toward the consequences of it. And Gerald Aldrich is already ahead of him. Chapter 8. The Final Reckoning. This is what the whole story has been building to. Stay. Aldrich did not wait until Sunday. Cole should have expected this. A man who can afford to hire the kind of help Aldrich hired is a man who hedges his bets, who distributes his risk, who does not put all his intention in one hand and wait to see what the hand produces. He applies pressure from multiple directions simultaneously so that when one direction fails, the others are already moving. The livery boy told him. Mentioned it offhandedly while Cole was saddling, the way livery boys and bartenders and boarding house keepers mention things they've observed, offhandedly, to people who seem like the kind of people worth mentioning things to. 2 men had arrived on the Thursday evening stage, together. Rooms at the saloon, not the boarding house, had not been seen at breakfast, horses stabled with saddlebags still on, the specific detail of men who don't intend to stay and don't see a need to pretend otherwise. Cole's hands stilled on the saddle cinch for a moment, then he finished tightening it, swung up, and rode hard. Aldrich had sent replacements, and they were not here to observe and assess. They were here to work tonight, because tonight was Friday, and Elias Cade rode the east fence line alone every Friday evening as reliably as the moon. Cole had 1 hour, maybe less. He found Elias at the east fence, dismounted, crouching to examine a post with a lantern held close. "Get on your horse," Cole said. Elias looked up, read Cole's face the way a man reads weather, quickly, without fuss, understanding what he was seeing. He stood, got on his horse. They rode north along the fence line at a pace that was faster than casual, but not yet alarm. And Cole was watching the ridgelines on both sides with the particular attention of a man whose body has been trained to notice the displacement of sound before the conscious mind has registered a threat. They were a quarter mile from the ranch house when he heard it. The specific way sound moves differently when something solid interrupts it. 2 horses, North Canyon Ridge, coming down fast. "Ride," Cole said. The first shot came from the left ridge and clipped the saddle horn, close enough that his horse lurched hard sideways. And Cole used that momentum, went with it instead of fighting it, kicked free of the stirrups and dropped into the dry creek bed below the trail in a controlled fall that hit his shoulder hard and rolled him across loose rock and brought him up on one knee with his rifle already at his shoulder before the echo of that first shot had finished bouncing off the canyon walls. The world went very narrow and very clear the way it always did in these moments. The sounds separated themselves into useful and not useful. The light was low, but not impossible. He tracked the second man coming over the ridge on horseback, moving fast, leaning low, and put the first shot through his hat, high and to the left, close enough to make him flinch and pull his horse sideways and expose himself for a half-second that was all the half-second Cole needed. The second shot counted. The first shooter broke. Cover to reposition. 3 steps across open rock face, moving between a boulder and a low scrub pine. 3 steps was 2 more than he needed. When it was over, the canyon went silent in the specific way it goes silent after violence, the deep, almost physical silence of a place that has just had something loud happen in it and is absorbing the fact. The gun smoke drifted, the horses had scattered. Somewhere on the ridge, a loose stone shifted and fell. Cole stood in the creek bed with the rifle still warm in his hands and the smell of powder sharp in the cold air, and looked at what the night had produced and felt the full weight of it settle over him. Not guilt, not relief, something heavier and more honest than either. The weight of a man who has finally stopped pretending that the things he does don't have a cost and is letting himself feel the cost in real time instead of deferring it. He had done this to protect something worth protecting. That was new. That distinction lay between removal and protection, between function and choice, was the thing he had been circling his whole adult life without ever quite landing on. He had landed on it now, in a dry creek bed in Cochise County, with gun smoke in the air and 2 men on the ground. He stood with it for a long moment, then he went to find Elias's horse. Elias Cade had not run. He was 30 yards back up the trail, still mounted, still, watching the canyon with the steady expression of a man who has decided to see a thing through to its conclusion. He looked at the 2 men on the ground. He looked at Cole. "Those men had families, probably," he said after a moment. "Yes," Cole said, "probably. Aldrich sent them." "Yes. You didn't have to come out here. You'd have been dead in 60 seconds, Cole said. Elias looked at the dark ranch house lights in the distance, at his land, at the creek running silver in the moonlight, the creek that 2 men had just been killed over in the end, though neither of them had known that when they took the contract. "I know," he said quietly. "I know you did." They rode back in silence. Margaret was on the porch. She looked at Cole's face the moment they rode in, not at the blood on his sleeve, not at the horses, at his face. And whatever she read there made her close her eyes briefly and open them again with a steadiness that told Cole she had been living alongside danger long enough to have built something like iron into herself without losing anything else in the process. "Clara's in bed," she said. "Good," Elias said. "Come inside," she said, "both of you. 1 chapter left, 1 reckoning." and the question this whole story has been asking since the cold open. What does a man do with a life that has been pointed in the wrong direction? Not what does he say? What does he do? Chapter 9. The last one. Stay with me. They sat at the kitchen table until well past midnight. Elias sent a rider to the territorial marshal with enough of the story to set things in motion. Gerald Aldrich's name, 2 men on the east fence line, the water rights dispute as context for anyone who knew how to read a situation. The marshal would draw his own conclusions from what the desert had left behind. Evidence in the desert is patient and honest in ways that people rarely are, and a man who hires violence leaves tracks even when he believes himself careful. Aldrich would face the law. Not a clean or satisfying justice. It rarely arrived in that form, and Cole had long since stopped expecting the world to provide neat conclusions. But the kind of real, grinding, consequential reckoning that the world actually provides when a man has made enough traceable mistakes. That settled, they sat. Margaret poured coffee. She did not ask the questions Cole had been quietly preparing himself for, did not demand explanations, did not revisit the original contract, did not make him account, point by point, for what he had been and what he had come here to do. She simply poured the coffee and sat with them the way a person sits who has understood at some point in their life that some things need to be lived with rather than fully spoken, that the full accounting of a complicated thing sometimes has to unfold in its own time. The kitchen was warm. The lamp burned steady. "What do you do now?" Elias asked eventually, not challenging, not leading, genuinely asking. Cole turned the coffee cup in his hands. "I don't know," he said. "I've been one thing for long enough that I don't have a clear picture of what else there is." "You're good with your hands," Elias said. "The fences held better after you went through them than they had in 2 seasons. The barn door hasn't made a sound since you rehung it." "I'm better with other things," Cole said quietly. "I know," Elias said. "I'm saying there are options, different ones than the only option you've been using." Cole looked at him. The frank gaze looked back. "You're a strange man, Elias Cade," Cole said. "My wife says something similar," Elias said, less charitably and with more specific examples. Margaret at the counter said nothing. But Cole, who had spent nearly 3 weeks learning to read the particular grammar of her silences, the way certain kinds of quiet from her meant one thing and other kinds meant something else entirely, detected something in the set of her shoulders that was not nothing. He looked into his coffee. He thought about 11 names on a list in his memory. He thought about a woman in a barn doorway saying the decisions that cost the most are the ones we made when we thought we had no choice. He thought about Clara in the hay with her kittens, and Captain asserting his authority over proceedings with the confidence of someone who has not yet learned that size is supposed to matter. He thought about the silence of the desert and the 2 roads and the one he had chosen. He did not know if a man like him could become what he was distantly, carefully beginning to imagine becoming. He suspected it would take longer than he had patience for, that it would require more grace than he felt he had been issued, that there would be nights, there would always be nights, when the list of 11 names came calling and the only answer he had for them would be insufficient. But he was here, in a kitchen in Arizona in the late hours, with coffee and a lamp and a man who had decided to trust his own judgment about people and had not, in the end, been wrong. He was here. And for a man who had spent 11 years being nowhere in particular, moving through places without leaving anything in them, here was somewhere. It was not an answer. It was a direction. It was a beginning. Cole Drevin stayed in Dry Creek through the winter. He did not announce this as a decision. He simply did not leave. And after a while, the not leaving became its own kind of statement. In spring, he signed on at the Cade Ranch with a formal wage and a room in the bunkhouse. He fixed things. He learned things he had never thought to learn: how to read the weather and the color of the evening sky, how to birth a calf in the cold before dawn, how to mend a bridle properly rather than approximately. He was very good at learning. It turned out that the same quality of attention he had given to dangerous rooms and difficult men translated, with surprisingly little adjustment, to the work of maintaining a living piece of land. Gerald Aldrich was arrested in December on charges of conspiracy and extortion. The case was not quick. It was never quick, but it was solid, and the territorial court had grown tired of men with money treating the law as a suggestion rather than a ceiling. The water rights finalized in Elias Cade's name on a Tuesday afternoon in January. Elias came home from the courthouse and told Margaret, and she stood in the kitchen for a long moment with her hands still at her sides and her eyes closed, not crying, not performing relief, simply receiving it, the way she received large things, with the full quiet weight of a woman who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and can finally, carefully, put it down. Cole was in the yard chopping wood when she came outside. She didn't say anything to him. She didn't need to. He looked at her and she looked at him, and there was a whole conversation in that look that belonged to no one else. One of those conversations that is not about what it appears to be about on the surface. One of those conversations that is about everything that is accumulated between two people over months of proximity and honesty, and the specific intimacy of having been through something hard together. Then Clara came running from the barn because Captain had knocked over the milk pail, and the moment passed the way moments do, not disappearing, but flowing forward into the honest, undramatic current of ordinary life. Ordinary life. Cole Draven, who had spent 11 years having none, found it was the most remarkable thing he had ever encountered. He thought about the list sometimes, 11 names. He thought about what might have become a 12th. He did not think about it long. The desert does not ask a man what he used to be. It only asks what he does with the light that's left. That is the story of Cole Draven, a man paid to take a life, who chose, instead, to find one. I want to know what stayed with you. Did Cole do the right thing? Could he have handled it differently? What do you think happened between him and Margaret, eventually? And what do you think happened to the list of 11 names? Do you think he ever made peace with it? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Every single one gets read. If this story landed for you, share it. Someone in your life needs this one. A friend, a sister, someone who loves a Western with real weight to it. Send it to them right now. That share costs you nothing and it means everything to this channel. Subscribe to Western Tale by PD if you're not already here. Hit the bell so you never miss a story. We drop new tales every week. Forbidden love, betrayal, revenge, identity, and the kind of endings that don't leave you when the screen goes dark. And one last thing. If Cole Draven stayed with you, wait until you meet the woman in next week's story. She doesn't wait to be saved. She does the saving herself, and the man she saves has no idea what to do with that. See you then.